Hello everyone. In this video we're going to look at a topic for the first time for forms, and yes, if you've been following along with all my tutorials so far you would have guessed it by now, and that's validation. So for this form so far we've built up a form using Bootstrap. We've added some dynamic nature to it in terms of providing these teams dynamically and also providing these injuries dynamically by using what was referred to as lookup services in Angular, or what I refer to as lookup services. It's essentially an Angular service, but when I want to look up things for a form, I usually call it a lookup. So now what we want to do is we actually want to start adding some validation to this form, so that when we get to the bottom here, we're not going to end up sending data back to the server that's empty and causes all kinds of problems. So we need to address making sure certain fields are required and all that kind of stuff. But in this video, what I first wanted to look into was basically how Angular determines if something is valid, invalid, and that kind of thing. They have a bunch of classes. There's actually 6 classes in total that determine the state of each control. And those 6 states are untouched. So that is when you haven't touched the field at all. You've done absolutely nothing inside of it. You have not even clicked on it. You've got touched, which is when you click on something like this and then you kind of click away, right? Regardless of whether you changed it or not, that's now considered a touched scenario. Then there is pristine, where you may have touched it, but you haven't actually modified anything inside of it. You haven't entered a key or anything like that. So literally, it's just like clicking in and then clicking out. Or, well, basically, it's also a starting state too, because pristine condition is you've never altered it, you've never gone in and modified anything inside of it. So it's actually the starting state. And then there's also dirty, when I actually type something inside this. And then there's valid, where you basically you add your rules into to determine whether something's valid or not. And we'll get more into that probably in the next video. For this first video, we're just going to be focusing on one set of validation, which is required. But this is just to demonstrate how you can build up basically the presentation of validation on your form to start off with. And the last one is invalid. So obviously, if you're not passing all the rules for your validation, then you're going to get an invalid state. So let's have a quick look on how this is managed. So the first one I want to look at is what happens. I want to show here very quickly when something is untouched. Alright, so we're going to give a certain behavior to each input to indicate that it's not being touched. At the moment, we can kind of see that I haven't touched anything. Actually, you can't tell if that's physically touched, right? But this one, I don't think I've touched yet. So there's no way of knowing that at this stage. But what we can do is we can tie into what Angular builds out as classes. So if you look at the input of this, you'll see in here we've got a whole bunch of classes that come along with that form control class we had. So here we've got ng-valid, ng-touched, and ng-dirty. So at this stage it's saying we have touched this input before, we have added something into it before, and so far the current state of it is valid. And the reason why it's valid is because we have no validation on it. So what I'm going to quickly do, just to demonstrate an example, is I'm going to come over to my component, and I'm going to come up to the first control here, the first name first control, and just after the ng I'm going to type the word required, right, and save. And we'll let this rebuild. Now I haven't touched this at all, so at this stage, it hasn't been touched. So here if we come back down to the control, we can see it's not touched. We can see it's pristine because I've never altered it, but it's currently invalid because of the fact that we've never, we're now required, right? So this requires a value in it. So if I now go and put something in it, like A, see how the classes changed. So now we've gone from touched to untouched. We've gone from pristine to dirty. And now we've gone from invalid to valid. Right? So if I come back in and I remove that away, what actually happens is we're still untouched. Oh, sorry, we're untouched again. Okay, that's interesting. I would have thought it would stay touched. ng dirty, so we have entered something in here before, and now we're still invalid, right? Because we've got nothing in there, we're not satisfying the required. So let's go and actually add some classes to these things to demonstrate what you can, or how you can handle these situations. So coming over to the CSS, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a selector called input.ng-untouched, like so, and we'll also add one for the text area, ng-untouched. And for the selector, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set a border on the controls, and we're going to make it 3 pixels solid, and we'll give it a blue color. So what should happen when I first start the form is that we should get borders around just about every control that can handle a border, and it should be 3 pixels wide, solid and blue. And as you can see, that's exactly what we've got here. So anything that can handle it, the select list unfortunately does not seem to handle borders, and obviously radio button checkboxes wouldn't do that either. But for any type of input, like a date picker here, we've got a text area, we've got an input control. And in fact, the reason why we're not getting a border here is because I haven't included the select.ng-untouched, like so. So this should now cover the team as well. And see, now we've got team. So what happens when we actually type something in and move away? So no longer untouched. If I step away, see the style's now gone because now we're no longer in that untouched state. However, if we go back in, and apparently if we come here and we do that, it's still untouched. So interesting how it worked last time. Because that's the behavior I expected last time, was that it would always be untouched after you did it the first time. But slowly I can start going through these and removing the style, right? And the very last one is buzzword. Cool. So that's untouched. That's basically, it's basically the starting of one of the starting states for an input. And it basically becomes touched as soon as you click in and then click out. So, for touched, what we want to do is when we've indicated we've touched, I'm now going to change the color of the border. So, input.ng-touched, text area, .ng-touched, select, .ng-touched, right. Border, again we'll make it 3 pixels solid, and we're going to go a light grey for this one. You can do whatever you like, but I'm going to use a light grey. Come back, so we should still get that blue. As soon as I click here and I click away, we get the grey. If I click out of this last name, that will become grey. If you click in the email, still see it's blue. As soon as I click out, it's grey. So that's now indicating that we've touched these 3 or 4 now, but we haven't touched any other fields, just these 4 at this stage. So you can apply all different kinds of styles based on whether something's been touched or untouched, that kind of thing. Now the next one I want to look at is dirty. So dirty, what we're going to do is we're going to actually set a background of a dark reddish color with white text. So this is to indicate that we've put something in the field. So dirty is we've entered a value into there. It's not empty, right? So let's have a look at that. So input.ng, dirty, text area, .ng dirty, select, I keep putting selected, .ng dirty. like so. And we're going to go background equals a very low number here, 300, and the color we'll just make white. So we're going to see a very, very dark reddish when we actually enter something. So we'll come back over. So we've got our blue, we're going to type something here like Daryl, and see how it's now become that red, dark reddish color with white text because we've changed it. If I come back in and I empty it, it's not going to change anything because as soon as we enter something, it becomes dirty. It never goes back to pristine. Now, if I go and tab through these things, they're still pristine at this point, right? Because we've never actually changed anything. But as soon as I type in A, no matter what I do, even if I come back, you know, there's nothing I can do about it. That's now considered a dirty field. I've entered something in it before. Yeah. So, let's have a look at pristine elements. So these would be almost the ones that are kind of like the touch but no change scenario. You know, we've touched it but we didn't enter anything. We never entered anything in there. That's essentially what pristine is. Or we're untouched and we've never entered. So basically, if you've never entered anything, that's when pristine will apply. Okay? So we're going to go over here again. I'm just going to copy this because it's going to be very similar. And we're going to type, instead of dirty, we'll have pristine. Think of pristine as in like, you know, you're collecting like something and you want it to be in pristine condition. In other words, nobody's touching it. You know, that's the same deal that it is here for Angular. So I make the background DD0, so a yellowish color, and we're going to set the color back to black because we won't be able to see through the yellow. So by rights, because we've never touched any field, you know, at the start of this form, we should start off with a blue border because we haven't touched anything, and because nobody's actually typed anything in the fields either, we should get a pristine display, which means we'll have a yellow background and black text. So overall, when I switch over, we should have a blue border with a yellow background and black text. And we do. See how we've got that because we're untouched. I haven't touched it yet. I haven't entered anything in it yet, so we get the yellow with the black text. In fact, we're never going to see the black text because as soon as I enter something, in fact, you can see it down here in the date field. This could have been white, but because I made the default black, you know, it doesn't really matter, right? So if I now come in and I enter something, what's going to happen is this input is no longer going to be pristine. It's now going to be dirty, so we're going to get that red and white text. However, we haven't left the field yet, so it's still going to be untouched. If that makes sense. So if I just put in D, see now how we've lost the pristine state? And if I tap away from this field, we've now made it a touch field as well, so you'll get that grey border. And as you can see like that. Now we're in this last name field. I'm not going to enter anything into this field because I still want it to be in pristine state. But when I tab away, I'm going to go from a touch state to an untouched state. So the difference here will be that the border will change to a grey color, but the text will, but the background will stay yellow. So we do that. And you can see that works as well. And then obviously, if I never leave, if I never leave this, which I did, you'll have the blue with the red and white text. Alright, so that's what we've covered so far. Now there's two more classes, and these are actually the two most important ones of all. And usually they're combined with one of the first four. And for me, I would probably consider, dirty and whatever valid or invalid would determine the behavior of a field. So, what we're going to do is when the field is dirty and the field is valid, we're going to set the border on the input to be a really thick green border. When it's dirty and it's invalid, right? We're going to set a very thick red or orangey red color, right, to the border. So let's go about doing that. So we go input dot, and you should know your CSS hopefully. So we go ng dirty. So we want it to be dirty dot ng-valid. So it's dirty and valid. That's essentially what that select is saying. It's an input that's dirty and valid. Also, I want a text area that is dirty and valid. And finally, select, there's ng dirty and ng valid. So it's a very long selector, but that's alright. Sometimes we get some long selectors. And I set the border on this, border to a bit bigger, so 5 pixel. We're going to go solid still, and we're going to go a lawn green color, so a very bright greeny color. And save that, So if I come in and I enter something now, you'll see I get that thick green border. If I go roll them back, you'll see, or when I press delete, this is no longer valid. So as a result, it's the green border's gone away. Alright, we go to the next one. And because we don't have the required field on that, as soon as we type something, it becomes valid. As soon as we're dirty, because we've got dirty and valid. If I just written valid, all these by default would have a green border around them. Right? In fact, I can show you that. If I come back to the code and I remove, for the first example, or just for the inputs for now, if I remove the dirty and just go save, what you're going to see is all these inputs, these first 3 inputs and a few more, are going to be green. See how they're green? So that's what that does. So that's why I put dirty in there, so to ensure that we have to actually change something before we can deem something to be valid, because we intend to eventually have something required. Now, also, which we'll find in a minute when I do the invalid, right, which I'm going to do right now. So change everything here from valid to invalid. So just put in front of everything, like so. And we're going to change it from long green to orange red. And we'll save that. Now here we've still got dirty and and invalid, so we're not going to get that red border behavior at the start. But if I come in here and I put in a D, we've got a valid state that's also dirty. If I had to remove the D, now we've got that red border because we're invalid. And now just to show you what we don't want to do, well, some sites do this, but if we remove the dirty from everything, ng dirty, in fact, it's only going to affect the top field here. So what I might do is I might spit back that. Because the first field is the only one with validation on it at this point, when we refresh, you're going to see straight away it comes up with a red border. So this is basically saying this field's required. Now, some people like this. Some people like the red border to indicate required fields. I tend to think that red's more important when you've entered something wrong or you've forgotten to enter something after you've tried to click submit. However, I think if you even tab away, it should come up with red, because that's just, I guess, good practice, just to indicate something failed straight away. Because a lot of old systems never used to do that. They wait for you to click the submit down here and then they report that something was wrong. But I like it when it's instantaneous. Now I'm going to put back the dirty, like so. Let that refresh. So coming back to this, I'm going to type in here, remove that, and there we go. So if I type in here and remove that, we don't get the invalid because we don't have the required. Now, this was just the starters for what I wanted to teach next. These are just the classes that are applied to Angular fields. What you can also do is you can display certain content based on these properties, and these properties can be accessed from code. And when I mean code, I'm not talking about your component TS file. I'm talking about within the HTML itself. But what you need to know is that there's this concept of an ng form and ng controls, right? So this overall form, instantly, because we're using Angular and it's being built using the Angular bootstrapper, it bootstraps this form or any form inside the bootstrap menu to be of type ng form. And what ng form has is it has things like, am I valid, am I invalid, am I pristine, is everything filled in, is everything not filled in, so on and so forth, right? So then, for example, down the bottom here, we can actually disable this button if the whole form is not working or the whole form isn't entered correctly, right? That gives us the power to do that. But also for each control, we can determine if something is valid, invalid, pristine, all those other properties that we just had now with the classes, we can access from code. Now, the reason why we want to access sometimes from code is that potentially we may want to put error messages underneath these things instead of having the class assigned to the text box. We may not want to touch the text box. Maybe we just want to put some text underneath instead, red or whatever. You know, it just depends on how the UI is meant to look. Also, we can also apply a different kind of styling to these inputs based on those controls, because what we can do is we can use Bootstrap to identify or to pretty up how this could look, right? Without having to go and write our own CSS. We could utilize the CSS that's all the classes that already exist with Bootstrap to pretty this thing up, you know, whenever there's an error or there's no error and so on and so forth. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that with you now. But first, I've just got a call, so I just need to take a quick break. So just see you in a moment. And I'm back. Sorry guys, I just had to take an important call there. It wasn't too long. Something family related. But all good. So, what I want to do now is I've shown you the default behavior for Angular Angular forms with classes using the ng classes that they specify for the inputs. But what I want to do is I want to utilize Bootstrap's classes in order to pretty this up a little bit more instead of trying to write my own CSS. So how do we go about doing that? Well, first let's go over here and let's remove all our CSS. Now this was just to have a play, so I was never going to keep it. So I'll let that fire up and reload. So it's going to look ugly again. And so we're back to we're back to step one. You know, nothing pretty here, but that's all right. We're gonna pretty this up pretty shortly. So what I also want to do, I'm going to come back to the component, and I'm going to put required on all the fields that I want to have required. So I'm going to head to the last name field, and let that required. The email will be required. Biography will say it's not required. We'll say the date of birth is required though. We're going to make the select required, the team. We're going to make both the height and the weight required. So let's do that. So height, and then down here weight, like so. And we're going to make the position required, I think. Let's have a think about this. Yes, we do need to make it required. So what we're going to do is, I think, if I remember right, I think I have to apply the required on all of these, not just one. In fact, I didn't specify it all Or did I? Wait a minute, one sec. Doesn't really like specify required for this particular field. I'll have to come back to that. This position field. For the checkbox list, again, I don't think I specified a required field. I'm going to handle that a different way. In fact, we're not going to have it as required anyway because it's just a bunch of checkboxes for injuries. And then lastly, password was required, so let's add that in. Alright, so now I just want to make sure. Actually, no, we'll leave for the moment. So, what do we want to do now? You know, we want to add it in the Bootstrap classes, right, to get the right behavior. So what are these Bootstrap classes? Well, next to the form group on each of these items, right, what you need to do for a success is you have a has success. Like so, right? For an error, you have has danger. Right? So if I go and look at this now, first name will look like it's correct, and last name will look like it's incorrect. And you can see green border around this one, red border around this one, and you think, okay, well, that's not that much. Well, there's actually more you can do in Bootstrap to make this look a little bit more presentable. So how do we do that? So we come down to the class for the first name and we go form control success, and for this one we go form control danger. We actually get little icons next to the fields as well. So if you just give it a moment for it to reboot, now we get a little tick and a little cross, and that actually doesn't look too bad. You know, so you've got the field that's successful, and you've got the field that's red. Now, what's the problem here? Well, at the moment, we're saying this one's valid, and it's really not valid, and then we're saying this one's not valid, which just happens to be true, but we're not giving it any condition for it to be false. So how do we do this in Angular 2? How do we leverage those properties that or those classes that we saw in code in order to get, or in order to determine if we're valid or not? Well, this is where we get into something called template variables, and I'm not going to spend too much time explaining what they are because the reality is it's all about directives. And I'm going to talk about directives later on in this set of tutorials, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it here. But what you need to do is on the form you put a hash, right? And you put the name of the form. So in this case, I'm just going to call it registration form, like so. And then I go equals to ng form. Now I'm not going to explain too much as to why it's ng form, but basically, this variable now we can use inside of conditions, and it will map to that ng form object, okay? That's automatically assigned to this form whenever we bootstrap in Angular, right? That's not strictly true what's happening there, but just for now, look at it that way, all right? We're creating a variable, and it's pointing to ng form, so we can do things that ng form can do, right? So, the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the input button at the bottom is not going to be enabled when the form is incomplete. When the form is basically invalid. So let's do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do an attribute binding. So disabled is our attribute. And now inside of here we can go, what's the name of the registration form? Like that. Now I can't remember if I have to go .form.valid or I just go .valid. Let's try .valid first and save that. In fact, it looks like it has to be dot form dot valid. So dot form dot valid. Oh, invalid. I should put. Sorry, invalid. That's probably part of the problem. In fact, it's probably, yeah. So there you go. So now we've got our button. We can't actually submit this form. Right. So instantly we're taking care of one major problem. We can't submit the form because it's not valid. Right. If I now come in and I fill in all these forms, regardless of the colors at the moment, if I come and fill this correctly, 24th of 12, 1991 or something. Team. We'll put 3, 45 we'll do. We'll add this. And see how when I added the last one, if I actually go and remove the weight, now it's disabled. As soon as I add the weight back in, we've got a valid form. If I remove any of these, it's going to create an invalid form. An invalid form, I should say. And so that's working. It's working as intended. Now, what we want to do is we want to actually apply those classes now, don't we? For each of these individual fields. So it's the same idea. We've got to have a template variable. So normally how we do it, and again, I'm not going to spend too much time explaining this, but we give it a name with the hash as well. So I usually give it the same name as the name property here. So I just go first name equals, and so here we type ng-model. And again, it's similar to above, we're binding basically not just the control information, but basically the value of the control, where we can check the validation of this, to the model that we're applying it to. Not the best way of explaining it, but just know in order to use form validation, you need to have hash a name and it needs to equal ng-model. Okay, just know that for now. So now what we can do is, instead of having had success up here, right, what do? Well, we know that we can use attribute binding, and we can go class dot has success, like so, equals, and we've named our template variable here first name, so we can go first name dot, and I'm going to say dirty, because we want the field, we want the success class to only be applied when it's dirty. In other words, not even if it's valid up at the start, we don't want to have it shown. We only want to show it when somebody's actually done something to the field. And so the and symbol, first name dot valid, right? And you want to say, okay, cool. So if I now go and save this, and let it run, we've lost the style automatically now. If I type in something, there's the valid, right? If I make it invalid again, style goes away. Valid, invalid, valid, invalid, valid, invalid. Right? But that's not it. That's just one class. Alright, and what we'll start doing now is we need to probably, because these can get very long, you need to kind of start spacing them out and putting them down on new lines. So now we also want a situation where we have a danger. Right? And that's also equal first name dot dirty, and when the first name is invalid, we want that feeling, right? So we'll go save. I'll let that run. So we come in, we put D, we get the success, we come back, we get the fail. Now notice we haven't got the cross, but when we do this, we got the tick. Well, we've done half the battle so far, right? We've covered the border part, but there's also that tick part, and that tick part came from the control itself. Remember when we added this form control success. Right, so we have to take that out, and now we have to come in, and again we may have to start moving these all onto separate lines. Yes, and it's going to make your file a lot bigger when you do this, or a lot longer, but I think it's, in the long run, it's probably a little bit more readable, because you know each attribute is on a separate line. Right? It's not the most ideal thing to see, especially with the div here. In fact, I normally put this one on the first line of that div, like so we at least know where the div ends. And then down here, so we need to add two more values. Just under class, I'm going to put class dot form control success equals equals first name dot, I'm just going to put valid here, because we don't need to put dirty, because it doesn't show up unless this shows up here, right? So I'm just going to say valid. That's all we need to do for that one. And then we also need to do the unsuccessful one. And we go form control danger, and make it invalid. And save. And now if I come back, let's recompile. We got D, we got it with a tick, we take away the D, we got the cross and the red. So that's how we can style up using Bootstrap, right? We can just do attribute bindings we normally would. We can use the actual input element itself to work out if it's valid or invalid, and we do that using template variables, where we tie to the actual ng model. And that's just one input. Now, obviously, I could go through, and I will go through the rest of this file, but I'm going to leave it for you guys to do the rest for yourself. The other thing that I will mention is that in order for it to work, you must, wherever the input is, you must have a form group class associated above it. So just down the page here a little bit, I found with the height, because I split it up into two separate areas, what I need to do is I need to add the form group to each of the two areas, like so. And that allowed me to then set the right classes and so on and so forth. But I'm going to actually end it here in this video, because number one, I'm trying to really make these things smaller. But the basic idea is that now you know how to set up a template variable in your markup. You know how to bind to the valid and invalid state for different classes. You understand what the ng classes are in terms of what the input provides and under what circumstances they provide them. And I think that's a good start. Now, in the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a form with all these classes set up. So I'm just going to do this now offline, and we'll look at other things like other kinds of validation that there is in Angular 2. And then finally, in probably the following video, we'll look to submit the form, and we'll probably create a preview screen. Say, are you sure you want to submit this data, that kind of thing, and we'll display the information that was on the form. And I think that's where we'll end it, and then we'll probably move on to a few other bits about our components, such as some inbuilt directives, what they all do for us, that kind of thing, how we use them. And then eventually we'll move on to directives, and then eventually on to pipes or services. Actually, what I will do after app components, I'll move on to services, then I'll move on to directives, and then I'll move on to pipes. And then from there onwards, we'll look at networking and anything else that I could think of that I would like to teach. But for now, you've seen validation in action, or at least how to apply classes. and you see how you can set it required. There's obviously more rules that we can apply to inputs. Most of them are built in by HTML5, so there's not too much I need to show. But anyway, I'm going to leave it here, and I'm going to let you guys fill in the rest, and let me know how you go. I will have the solution for this up on GitHub. It'll be under tutorial 12. And if you guys, obviously, I should have mentioned this to you guys, but if you want to follow, or if you haven't worked it out by now, you can actually follow along with this video by checking out tutorial 11 and basically just doing what I'm doing. And you would have seen for yourselves that it actually works. Okay, guys, I'm going to finish it there. Thank you everyone for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.